On today's show, we break down borrowing and debt in the big topic. We speak to someone about how they managed to sort out their real debt in our real talk. And we'll see if I remember to turn my mic on this time. It's 4 p.m. We're live, and this is My Moneycast by MyBank. Okay, welcome to episode 2 of the Moneycast by MyBank, and we're covering debt and borrowing today. Thanks for joining us. Welcome along. If you are the first time watching us here, feel free to come and follow us on all our social media. We'll be providing this live stream to all of these places every Thursday at 4 p.m. and a chance to answer your questions, whether you put it in the chat, whether you email it to us later on. You can email us anything you want at info@mybank.org and we'll pick that up. The other thing to say is if you want to ask any questions, if you want to shout out, if you just want to let us know you're here, put it in the chat. My boy Declan is moderating today and will be in the chat answering questions if you need, and I'll be here to answer anything live if you have any questions. So I know we have people watching from all over London. Potentially we might have some people I know from Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, so if you're there, say hi. But if you want to come and say hello, want to shout out, put it in the chat and we'll pick it up. We're going to get started today with our usual first thing. We're going to go on to the news. So let's start with Heads Up. Oh, the news this week. I think it's being dominated by the next one. Places are starting to reopen. So the lockdown is starting to lift. Now, be careful. The government hasn't lifted the lockdown yet, and it will be announcing something on Sunday in terms of how it wants to proceed with lifting the lockdown for everyone. But at the time being, all restaurants are starting to open up. So KFC and Burger King have both reopened some outlets across the UK. In fact, if we have a look at this, this was the scenes from a Burger King that reopened with traffic going all the way around the block. But it's not just big takeaways that are starting to bounce back a little bit. We've also got smaller takeaways. These guys are from Sweet Mandarin in Manchester, and it's got to the point where these guys are so thankful for their customers that they've started to put handwritten notes in with the food just to show that they appreciate the support throughout the coronavirus time. So I guess, you know, while the big restaurants are opening up again, those small restaurants have been enjoying some of that money. Don't forget your local shops. They really need your help during this time. But as you can see, things are starting to open up again. So who knows what will be. In other news, Apple are in the news again. Apple, known for making very expensive products. You might have realized that the image on the screen here is of the Mac Pro, not the MacBook, Mac Pro. Well, they've just released some wheels for the Mac Pro, and it's $700. This video is from Unbox Therapy, who took us through the unpackaging process of these $700 wheels. Just to put that into perspective, these $700 wheels would cost £565 in the UK. The PC itself is only $6,000. A full system, however, is up to $50,000. But for the price of these wheels, you could go and buy yourself a brand new iPhone 11. So I guess the question is, would you rather have 4 wheels, or would you rather have a brand new iPhone? I think I know which one I prefer. Next up, Virgin Money has suspended 32,000 people's credit cards. They were told by email on Tuesday that their accounts would be suspended, sometimes with no reason given. A lot of these customers felt like they had good standing and they didn't need their credit to be suspended, but Virgin Money have said that as part of their normal review process that they've had to hold some people's accounts back. So what they said was, as a responsible lender, we do need to review accounts regularly in line with other credit card providers. Customers can request for accounts to be reopened, including any customer impacted by COVID-19. These will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis and fast-tracked if necessary. Our approach is clear that we will support any customers impacted by COVID-19 to ensure that they have funds available for essential spending, and we would encourage anyone with concerns to get in touch so we can help them as quickly as possible. Now, with the current circumstance and people potentially out of jobs and losing income, the ability to borrow on a credit card for some has been a lifesaver. We're going to talk a little bit about whether or not you should be doing that during this crisis, and if you are broke, what should you be looking for in terms of best deals if you are having to borrow. But at the time when people need the money most, Virgin Money potentially cutting off a lot of customers who might need the help. So we'll see if that ripples out to the rest of the market, and indeed if Virgin changed their mind. And lastly, for the news, last week we talked about National Theatre Live putting on Frankenstein, so you could watch that for free on YouTube. This week I'm talking about Harry Potter. So if you're a Harry Potter fan, obviously it's been a while since the films have been out. Daniel Radcliffe has since moved on to other things. Thought you might like to see this.
Hello, everyone.
I'm at home.
I'm in my sitting room.
In a sort of book room.
I am in my little cosy corner where we like to do reading.
And I'm sitting here warm and cozy in front of the fire.
And I'm really excited to get to read
Harry Potter
Harry Potter.
Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone.
Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
by J.K. Rowling.
Hi, I'm Daniel Radcliffe, and this is Chapter 1 of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone.
That's right, Daniel Radcliffe, the boy who lived back as Harry Potter, kind of, in a way, reading the first chapter of the first Harry Potter book, The Philosopher's Stone, or The Sorcerer's Stone, if you're watching in America. They'll be doing this every week for 17 weeks with a different celebrity, and yes, you did see David Beckham sitting by his fireplace with the Harry Potter book ready to go. 17 weeks, including Stephen Fry and the guy who played Newt Scamander, Eddie Redmayne. Fantastic. If you're a Harry Potter fan, go and check that out. So what do you think? $700 wheels? Would you pay for it? Would you bother listening to Harry Potter again if it was read by a celebrity? And do you think that it's fair for credit cards to be cut off at this difficult time? Let us know in the chat, or let us know by email at info@mybank.org, and we'll be including some of that stuff next week if we get enough. But for now, let's move on to our main part of the show, and that's the big topic. Now, as I mentioned, the big topic this week is budgeting and debt. So we talked about borrowing and debt, and we talked about this very briefly last week during the COVID stuff. So we're going to expand on this a little bit, and we're going to take some of the stuff we do today from a program we run in the real world when lockdown doesn't happen. We have a program called MoneyWorks. MoneyWorks is a program we run for 16 to 25-year-olds. We run it in places where young people are, so a college, youth clubs, that kind of place. And we come out to you, we bring some trainers, and we will train you in all of these things. So budgeting and household costs, how to manage your income, banking, being informed, how to borrow safely, how borrowing works, and avoiding scams. So if you are interested in doing a MoneyWorks or seeing what's involved, drop us an email in info@mybank.org, or on themix.org. We're going to have a light version of this course available very, very soon. So keep your ears to the ground for that one. But the MoneyWorks program is where we're going to take a lot of the stuff today. So let's get into it. First and foremost, let's talk about why people borrow in the first place. We know that we have to pay it back, and we know it's going to be a trouble. Why bother paying anything? Why borrow anything at all? Well, the answer is that there are some good reasons to borrow. If you want to buy a house, if you want to start a business, you might need to borrow money from the bank, and that's a valid way to do things. But that's what we call a good debt. A good debt where you borrow money and you make money off it, we call a good debt. Bad debts are debts where you're going to end up paying more money than you borrowed in the first place. And that's the case with more loans than you might imagine if you don't know much about borrowing. There's one magic number you need to be aware of, and that is the APR, but we'll come to that in a second. One of the things I wanted to raise is COVID borrowing. If you are short of cash right now, if you are out of work, if you're trying to pay the bills, borrowing now might be a way to get through it. Just make sure you're planning for the future and not borrowing recklessly, and also making sure that there is no other option, because if you can get help elsewhere, that's the far better option. So let's have a talk about, you might have seen this. This is normally in the small print, or they say it very quickly at the end of a credit card advert, represented 13.5% APR, or whatever the number is. It's really important you understand the number APR, because the higher the APR, the more money you're going to pay back. And I don't know about you, I'm not looking to pay back more than I have to. So if you can find loans that are lower in APR, you will pay less money back than if you found one with a higher rate of APR. And APR literally stands for annual percentage rate. So it's the amount of interest they're going to add every year on your debt if you haven't paid full. It's always worked out for the year, which is why if you look at payday loans, some of their interest rates are really high, in the thousands of percent. Most credit cards come in at about sort of 10 to 30%, that kind of range. But if you go high with your APR, it costs you more money. Go low with your APR, it costs you less. And if you can find something with zero APR, one. Now, in terms of if you're thinking about borrowing, we think you should watch your back. That's not a threat, I promise. It's this. Watch your back means you should be budgeting your borrowing, thinking about how you're going to pay it back afterwards, and do you really need it? Knowing what the APR is and how much that's going to cost you on top. So if you're borrowing £1,000, is it £1,000 or is it £1,100 you'll be paying back? Know that before you take the borrowing out. Know what the consequences are for not paying back, or for paying back late, or for paying back early. Some places charge you pay back your credit early. Make sure you know that before you do anything else, so you know what choices you can make. And the best thing to say here is know your options. You have lots of choices. You don't have to borrow. If you can put things away, if you can save money for the item instead, or if there are people that can help, borrowing might not be the best way to do it. So always think about whether there's another way to do what you need to do to get what you need. Now, one of the other things that will affect your APR is your credit score. Now, a lot of people will have heard of credit scores, maybe don't necessarily understand the full extent of how it works. So let me break it down very, very basic. A credit score is a measure of how worthy you are to be borrowed to. So if you've never been borrowed to before, some people think that they've got a perfect credit score. I've never had debt, therefore my perfect score must be perfect. No, it's not. It's 0. Because you've never proven that you can borrow safely. I'll give you an example. If you're walking down the street with a very nice jacket on, and you saw me, and you didn't know who I was, you've never seen these Moneycasts, and you've never heard of me before, and I said to you, borrow me your jacket, I'm going to guess that not a single person in the chat would want to borrow me a jacket if you didn't know who I was, didn't know where I was from, etc., etc. A credit score is a way for me to prove to you that I can be trusted. So imagine you had a friend with you who you trust, and you really trust this person, and they turn around to you and say, actually, the last time I borrowed Nick something, he put a $5 extra in the box, he tidied it up, he cleaned it, he gift wrapped it and gave it back to me, and it was all on time. I'm not saying you would borrow to me, but you'd probably be more likely to borrow to me if someone else said it was okay. And that's all a credit score is. It's a company who's looked at all the data on all the ways you've borrowed before and all the debts you've currently got, and it says, yes, this person's you can trust this person to pay it back, or no, we don't think this person can handle it, and we don't think you should borrow to them. Most credit score applications are done automatically. So it's not a person making a choice, it's a system, it's an algorithm. How many bills have you paid on time? Have you missed payments? Closed any accounts without paying all your bills? These are all things that make a difference. In fact, let's show you some of the things that you can do to increase your credit score. Some of these are in your control, some of them aren't. But first of all, register to vote. If you're on the electoral roll, just to register to vote, you don't even have to vote. You will increase your credit score will increase. Close any accounts you have that you don't use, especially if they're credit accounts. We say leave the older ones open because they've built up more of a trust. So if you've got a new credit card you've used for a bit and you don't need it anymore, get rid. Don't make too many credit applications. If you apply for credit and you get failed, 3 months is the recommended time to wait, and 6 months if you can, before that failed credit attempt kind of comes off entirely. So don't try and get credit in lots of places at once, and don't try and get lots of credit if you've been failed, because that failure will follow you around and people will see that you've tried to apply for credit. Keep on top of your repayments is the #1 thing. If you can pay things on time, people love you and they will give you the credit. Try not to move house too often if you can. I know that for a lot of young people watching this, you may not be in that position, but staying in one address for 3 years or more helps your credit score. Close any joint accounts that have a bad credit record. If you've got a joint account for any reason with someone who had loads of debts, you're being dragged down by that person's credit report. So close any accounts that you're not using that are joint and have a bad credit record. And as much as can, try to keep your income regular. Again, no, that's not always possible, but it's one way to help your credit score. And if you look at this next graphic, this is from Experian, and this is the average credit score based on age. And you can see that 21 to 25 and 18 to 20-year-olds, the people that I'm hopefully talking to, kind of, it's okay. And then it dips when you get to 26 because people make mistakes and they don't know how to fix them. And then they get older and they learn to fix them, and then they become more financially stable. And you can see as you get older that kind of goes up the curve. I would love it if everyone watching this show beat that curve and managed to get their credit score to where the elder people are right now. And that means you've got much more choice in terms of things like mortgage, in terms of things like car loans, that kind of stuff. The better your credit score, the better your options. So the less you mess around with credit, the more it will be there to help you when you. Now, who do I pay first? How do I choose? If I have lots of debts, how do I decide who I pay first? Well, actually, there is a kind of hard and fast rule. If you go to debt advisors, they will ask you, who are your priority debts? Priority debt, who's important? My friends are important to me. My family's important to me. Priority debts are very, very specific. They are debts that will end up in you either going to court, going to prison, or being evicted from your home, or being cut off from essential services. So there's only a few debts in this country that fit that criteria. Everything else we would say is a non-priority debt. Let me show you what I mean. Let's have a look at priority debts here. So on the left here, you can see that things like electric and gas and telephone are priority debts because you can be cut off. And you don't want that to happen, especially with your gas and electric. You know, phone you might be able to survive a little bit without. Gas and electric, that's your heating, your hot water, running your fridge, all the stuff you need for your house to maintain. Your TV license is a priority debt because if you don't pay it, you can go to jail. 6 months and a £1,000 fine, which is ridiculous. And in case you're going, well, it's fine, no one goes to jail for TV license, 26 people did last year. It does happen. If you're paying maintenance, like child support, that's a priority debt, as is any kind of court fines you may have. Rent or mortgage, because you can be evicted. Council tax, because you can go to prison if you don't pay it. And a secured loan, if it's secured against your home or your car, because you might lose that item. They're all the priority debts. On the right-hand side, you can see some examples of non-priority debts. So things like credit cards, bank overdrafts, store cards, personal loans, catalogs, friends, family, all those other things. If they're not on the left list, they're on the right. So if it's not a priority debt, they have to be paid afterwards, essentially. And the way it normally works is, if you have, say, £10 spare every week, and £5 of it needs to go to priority debt, that's what happens. And the rest gets carved up amongst the non-priority debt. So they know that they're less important, and they will let you pay off the priority debts first, and anything you've got left afterwards you can then pay off. The golden rule with paying off debts actually is do it as fast as you can. The quicker you can pay off a debt, the less you'll pay back, especially if there's interest involved. And the stress of carrying a debt isn't worth it. If you can pay it off quicker, you should. Because it means you'll be thinking about it less, worrying about it less, and it will be adding less and less interest to your debt for every month. And what if I don't pay? Well, I just mentioned, if you don't pay some of the priority debts, you're going to have things like court and prison potentially, or eviction, or losing items. But what about if it's one of those non-priority ones? What can they do? If they can't take me to prison, if they can't cut me off, what power have they got? Well, we'll go through that in just a sec. Just to let you know, Declan very kindly has put a link to a way to get a free credit check via Experian. You can also use, not Noddle, what they call now, Credit Karma, or ClearScore, and they're the same service. Golden rule, don't pay for credit checks. There's one company, I can't remember the name, that offers you the chance to do a credit check with all of the companies at the same time for a fee. You can do that for free yourself if you want. As long as it's free, you're golden. Now let's talk about what happens if you don't pay a debt back and it's a non-priority debt. This is our debt diary. So you see two columns here. The column with the pound sign, that represents anything you're going to get charged. And the column with the paper, that's going to represent anything on your credit file. So you don't pay, first thing that happens, send you a reminder letter. Please pay us. Then they start calling because you haven't responded to the reminder letter. And at one point, I had a credit card debt when I was at university, and the credit card company called me literally 3 times a day, even if I told them I didn't have any money. So they can be quite aggressive with these phone calls, and it can cause a bit of stress. But they'll start to call you now, and then you'll get the warning letters, the red letters. And at this point, they've probably put some interest on your account, and you've probably been marked on your credit file that you've missed payments. So now your credit file knows as well. Then they're going to sell the debt. After a while, they're going to get bored of chasing you, and they're going to sell your debt to a debt collection agency, who then own the debt and will then come to you to collect the debt. So then they will send you letters to repay. And they will send out a warning that they're going to come and collect. They're going to come to your house and take items worth the value of the debt, unless you can pay. They also whack on the extra charges. They charge for letters. They charge for visits. And on your credit file, you're now going to be in what's called default. So let's say it was a phone company you owed the money to. The phone company got bored, sold it to the debt collector. The phone company then tells your credit file, you're in default. Didn't pay us. Didn't finish the agreement. That's a bad thing. That will stay on your file for 6 years. Other lenders will see that default for 6 years. If you don't heed the warning of the debt collector, they'll come out. They'll see if they can take anything out of your property to sell at auction. If they don't make enough at auction, they'll come back. And then if that doesn't work, they will try and make it what's called a county court claim, and they'll take you to court, try and recover the money. And if that's successful, the county court order will put out as essentially it's a court fine, which you need to pay. But it's called a CCJ, and that CCJ will last on your file for 6 years. So again, anything that happens on your credit file normally lasts 6 years. Bankruptcy is 7 or 10, depending on the type. But it's one of those things to think about. If you can stop this process at the top of that list, at the writing letters, you never have to go to court. You never have to worry about it. It's all a lot easier after that. And the biggest thing I can say here is that if you are struggling with debt and borrowing and you need some help, I'm going to throw this up on screen. These are the guys we would recommend you speak to. So Step Change, Citizen Advice, Money Advice Service, the National Debt Line, Debt Advice Foundation, all decent debt charities that we trust, and the Money Saving Expert website for loads of top tips for how to save money, how to talk to creditors, that kind of stuff. If you need any help with debt, these are the guys to go to. Okay, and I think that's it for the big topic this week. We're going to move into the next section, which is Real Talk. So, here we go. And on this week's Real Talk, I'm joined by Josh Rigby Farrell, who's a Regional Education Officer for us here at MyBank. How you doing, Josh? Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. So before we get into the conversation about debt, 'cause we've been talking about debt and borrowing in the show, do you want to just explain a little bit about what it is you do for MyBank as a Regional Educational Officer?
Yeah, so I'm based up in the Northwest, in Liverpool, and I work around the Northwest region, so Cheshire, Merseyside, Greater Manchester, Lancashire, around those areas, delivering the MoneyWorks programme, which is our 16 to 25 offering. And I also deliver Money Twist KS4 to young people in alternative provision as well. And I also try and improve MyBnk's visibility within the Northwest and try and expand our brand.
Awesome, great. So, we didn't get you here to do an advert for MyBank, don't worry. Like, a little birdie told me that you might have some stories for us about debt and kind of dealing with it in the past.
Yeah, it's been an issue in my past quite a few times. I've gotten quite used to getting into debt, but thankfully, as I've gotten older, I've become more mature, more responsible, and that has allowed me to work my way slowly out of debt.
Awesome. So, is there one type of debt that you found was particularly stressful or hard to deal with when you were younger?
Yeah, I think the biggest one for me, there were a few utility bills. Well, I suppose all bills were quite difficult, but council tax was quite a difficult one to deal with. It chased you everywhere. You couldn't get away from it. It's quite expensive to pay. And as well as that, it can get you into trouble with the government, which can result in you being sent to prison. It wasn't as bad for me, but I did spend a day in a cell because of non-payment of.
You spent a day in the cells because you didn't pay your council tax?
Yes, I did. Yeah, when I was about 21, it was actually my 21st birthday. I got a knock on the door by some enforcement officers, but I wasn't in. I was at my girlfriend's, so I was like, "Well, it's my 21st birthday. I'm not dealing with that now. They're getting swerved for a while." So I think I avoided it for about a week or so, and then I finally got in touch with them. And they said to me, "Oh, will you come and meet us round the side of the magistrate's court?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's fine." I thought I was just going to get, speaking to, sorted out, payment plan put in position and things like that. But what happened was I was waiting by the side of the entrance to the magistrates, and they revved down the street in a Ford Galaxy, and then two what I could only describe as bounty hunters turned up, enforcement officers from the court. They had the full flak jackets on with enforcement officer on the back, jumped out, arrested me on the spot, and then proceeded to take me down through the side door down to the cells in the bottom of the magistrate's court. And so I was a bit flippant at this point. I was a bit like, well, I'm in the magistrates because I'd done law at college. Right. So I thought I was a bit smart with what I thought a magistrates could and couldn't do. So as I was getting marched into the cell, I was like, it's fine. I'm not bothered. The magistrates can't do anything to you. And then, the cell officer proceeded to tell me that, magistrates can do things. They can send you to prison for 6 weeks. There's the power there to do that, which then, got me wondering, started to really worry me. And I think just because of my attitude at the time, I was a bit hard-faced. Again, like I said, flippant. They made me sweat. So I was in the cell from about 10:30 in the morning to about 5:05 at night. I think I was the last one. It was the last one to be saw by the magistrates. And, they were like, "Why aren't you paying your council tax? You do know you can go to prison for this, blah, blah, blah." Which obviously I knew, but I just didn't think it would be one of those things that would be happening to yourself. So, I gave them the sob story. I'm only 21, this sort of thing, blah, 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 struggling with jobs, employment, and these sort of things. And thankfully, they let me off. They made me, they sent the fine back to the council, and I set up a payment plan with them, which thankfully I paid off. But yeah, I think that was quite an eye-opening time into the power of the government in terms of enforcing non-payments of council tax or maybe benefit overpayments or TV license, these sorts of things that can get you into actual sort of trouble with the government.
Absolutely.
And I think from then that was where I was started to realise about the seriousness of debt, on what it can do to you and the stress it can cause and things like that.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that happens with debt and stress is that people don't talk about it, so they never really get any help. So they kind of get stuck in their own head, and that's it, and it gets worse and it gets worse and it gets worse. I mean, I'm going to assume that it's not as bad now as it was before. I mean, you work for MyBnk's, so...
well, yeah, I know. It's taken a while. It's not as if I became... a debt angel straight away. I still got into debt after that. But as I've gotten older, you start to think of life and look at life in a different way. You start to think of your future. Back in when I was younger, I was like, I'm never going to have a full-time job, never going to have a house, don't care about any of that stuff. And, here I am, 32, education officer for MyBnk, looking at maybe possibly having a mortgage, and the only way I could have done that is to try and clear the debts that I had, which isn't a easy thing to do. It takes a while, but finally I think I'm getting there.
So I guess, yeah, I mean, the last thing I was going to ask off the back of that was if we're moving from a position of being in these debts and having these problems to, like you're getting to now, the position to buy a house and take out a mortgage and that kind of stuff. How do we get there? Is there any kind of top tips? And I'm going to do my top tips in a sec anyway, but anything you kind of recommend as things to do if you're in this kind of situation? Yeah.
I think, a lot of people seem to try and live beyond the means. I think a lot of people see other people living these lives and they want to emulate those lives. And so, don't realize the financial problems that can cause. So, yeah, try not to look at, everyone's got their own situation monetarily. So people need to be more aware of that and not try and, match other people's sort of financial sort of spend in
keeping
terms
up
of
with the Joneses
things.
type
yeah
thing.
that sort of thing. Yeah, so try not to do that. It's good to be individualistic, and you don't have to spend loads of money on rubbish for to do that sort of thing. I personally don't think anyway. Secondly, I think we touched on it before, is talk to people. I think a lot of people start to resent the companies that they are in debt with. And also they don't want to talk about debt because people see it as a failure maybe, that they're in so much debt, and people just, don't really talk about it, let it build up. And it can cause a lot of stress. So I think talking about it with your family and friends to start with, also with the companies that you're in debt with, because they want to help you. I think there's more of a holistic approach when it comes to dealing with debt nowadays by companies. It's not just like how it used to be, where it was like, you owe me money, I want that money. We don't care how we get it, we're going to get it. Now there's different approaches, there's different mechanisms in place to protect consumers when it comes to debt. So, it's a less scary environment as it used to be. So yeah, talking about it definitely helps.
I think, the first step is acknowledging that there's something you need help with. Yeah.
And there are, there's a lot of help out there nowadays. There's a lot of debt charities that will, look at your debts for you and talk you through, even if you're not understanding what's really going on or how a debt is snowballed, because debts can snowball. You have a letter, it can get sent from a company to a debt collection agency, and they just throw their drink on it, throw however much for sending out a letter. But, if that's legal, they're going to do it to make money, aren't they?
That's it. And I guess the trick here is either don't get there, or when you do get there, know what you're doing and get the help if you need it.
Yeah, definitely.
Great, thank you. Josh, thanks very much for joining us for this week's Real Talk. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Have a good one. Thank you very much.
You too. And that closes out Real Talk for this week. And let's get into the next section, which is slightly different this week. It's our top tips. Oh, sorry. Just to go back, I think we had a mic issue. There was a question from Beetroot, who was asking on YouTube, which boosts your score the most in terms of credit score? And the answer there is I'm not sure. It depends on the credit bureau you're working with. There's Equifax, there's Experian, there's a couple of different companies that might give different things different weight. In general, what I will say is if you can do the little things like getting on the electoral roll, getting things, for example, like your credit facilities in line and taking out all the ones you don't use anymore, that will help. It's not really about doing one major thing. There is a trick that a lot of people use called snoozing. Snoozing was, I think the term was coined by Money Saving Expert. I might be wrong about that. But the idea of buying one major expense every month on a credit card, like a travel card or food bill, and then you pay that off immediately to increase your credit score. The danger with that is that if you're not disciplined, you might spend too much on that card. And then the idea that Beetroot said about they look rich but are going broke, well, that might be easier to fall into. Incidentally, on that point of looking rich but going broke, next week we are covering ways to make money and ways to save money in lockdown. So make sure you join us next week and we might be able to give you some tips about how to keep looking rich and get rich as well. But to round up this show, I'm going to give you 3 top tips. Oh, sorry, last one. Does closing accounts increase credit? Closing accounts, credit accounts that you're not using might help because it shows the credit lenders that you're not trying to get lots of different credit facilities at the same time. It's about how much you're using as well. So actually they like you to use a little bit of credit but not all of your credit, and if you're using too much of your credit it can hurt your credit file. So certainly if there's old credit accounts laying around, close them if you're not using them. But like I say, try to keep the older ones open first, because the longer you've been with someone, the more trust you've built up, the better that is for credit file. Okay, so let's go through my 3 top tips for debt and borrowing. Tip number 1, always do the math. It's this way. Always do the math about how much you're borrowing. You're welcome, Beetroot. One of the problems that people get into when they borrow is that they don't think about how much it will cost at the end of the process. So if you're going to do this and you're going to borrow, especially during this time of coronavirus and being furloughed and potentially not working, do make sure you've worked out whether you can afford to pay for this when it's all said and told. The next tip is if you do owe money to companies, talk to them as soon as possible. Do not wait. The longer you leave it to talk to a company, the bigger the problem you may have to solve. And if you think about your friends and family, if you owed them money and didn't talk to them, they'd be upset too. So get a hold of that company. There's people on hand who are there to help you. Use the help. If people are getting paid to sit on a phone line in a helpline somewhere, let them earn their money. Talk to them. Tell them what you need and see if you can get the help. They'd much rather have some money regularly than no money at all. And finally, don't suffer in silence. If you are having any debt troubles, if you're sitting there thinking, this is me, I don't know what to do, I'm so stressed, don't sit in silence. Speak to someone. Speak to a friend or a family member. Speak to a professional. Email us at info@mybank.org and we'll send you some links. But never sit on this on your own. Debt is not something to be ashamed of. Everybody potentially might have a debt you don't know about. So please don't feel ashamed got into a situation where you might not be able to afford your debts. happens to a lot more people than you might imagine, and there is help available. So, number one, do the math. Number two, speak to people as soon as you can if you can't pay them. And number three, don't suffer in silence. And that is my top tips for the week. And that's about going to do it for us this week. Remember, if you want to get a hold of us and see us next week, this is where we'll be broadcasting every week, Thursday at 4 p.m. You can also watch this again afterwards. We keep this up on YouTube, so you'll always be able to watch the old episodes. If you missed last week we covered COVID-19 and all the things you might need to know about how it's messing with your money. Next week, we're talking about saving and making money in lockdown while you're at home. If you want to send us anything or get involved, if you want to come and be a contributor, if you want to come and be one of our live guests, send us any videos or any ideas you're working on, you can send all of that stuff to info@mybank.org. That's info@mybank.org. And if you ever want to get a hold of me, you can get a hold of me there as well. But for today, for the time being, my name is Nick Smith Patel. I've been the head of education for young people at MyBank, hosting this My Moneycast. Until next week, stay safe, take care, bye-bye.